All this week on The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland, a Follow Your Heart Valentine's Week featuring that great Godwinks guy, Squire Rushnell, and his incredible wife, Louise Duarte, who travel the world, or Zoom these days, helping couples, singles, and children meet the true heart of God through their art. Oh, and by the way, did you know Squire Rushnell is an honorary Canadian? His dad grew up in Belleville, Ontario, so we're claiming him for the national treasure that he is. Also on the show, a Perspective regular guest co-host, Mitch Hunter, who Mike says is Niagara's most eligible bachelor. He's here, and Mike's giving out Mitch's number. Ryan and Jennifer Walter are back to give us the nitty-gritty on what long-married couples really want from each other. The former NHL great and his wife help couples and leaders around the world. Plus, Vian King, we call her Queen, the first ever Miss Wheelchair Canada author and speaker, is here, this time with her husband Vaughn, who she says she had to drag to the show kicking and screaming. And the doctor is in the house. Grant Mullen and his wife Kathy are here to talk about ways we can shake that nasty, rude, negative inner critic of ours. So move over, Jimmy Fallon. Mike's dream job of hosting late night is coming true. Uh-oh, Julie, you may need your fencing sword.
Hey, welcome to The Perspective today as we're talking about all this stuff about relationships all week. We've got Julie zooming in today from Florida. We're glad you're with us, Julie. And we got our backup co-host, Mitch Hunter here. Mitch, glad you're here.
Mike, can I just say, it is good to be back. I've had a couple long months at school, but I'm having fun being back on the program. But I just got to start firing away with questions. It's Valentine's week, and I want to learn. Julie, I've got to ask, how do you be a good listener to Tor? How do you do that?
Well, I don't know.
Okay. You said enough. Okay, Mike.
She's going to have to listen to the talk today. Yeah.
We're all taking notes today. And Mike, I got to ask, with you and Terry, who talks more?
Who talks more? Mitch, when you've been married as long as I have, you're not going to answer that question on the grounds that it could get you into a whole lot of trouble. But we're glad you're here with us. Mitch has a lot to learn today on relationships as Niagara's most eligible bachelor. But I'm glad that Grant and Kathy Mullen are going to be with us. Actually, we're going to weigh in on some heavy stuff. What happens when a marriage blows up? Can you recover? How do you move ahead? It's important stuff. It's heavy stuff, but I know it's going to help you. Stay with us. Well, I'm glad today to have back on the program a favorite of mine, Dr. Grant and Kathy Mullen. And Grant was an anesthesiologist. He's a mental health practitioner. And he and Kathy have traveled through many parts of the world offering their Emotionally Free course, which helps couples come together to be one to experience all that God wants for them as an individual and as a couple. And Grant and Kathy, I want to welcome you again today to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, it's nice to be back. And of course, it's a long trip on Zoom.
Yeah, well, and Grant, I have heard that joke before, so work on some new stuff, okay? Kathy, I'm especially glad that you're with us today. We're actually going to be talking about some heavy things today because as much as everybody idolizes relationships in the midst of this Valentine's week, we know there is so much pain. And I thought we could talk about that, and in particular, just to unpack and address some things that will help people. One of the things that I would love to get you to weigh in on as you've worked with couples is to talk to me about emotional affairs. How do they start, and are they as dangerous as the real thing?
Well, an emotional affair, of course, is dangerous because it doesn't usually end there. It usually continues on. But actually, there's an easy way to understand why affairs even happen, whether it's emotional or physical. It's that most people marry because the person they marry, they think is going to meet all their emotional needs. I mean, unless you're marrying for money, that's usually the reason you marry. And so, of course, it's not possible for the person you marry to meet all your emotional needs. So then that generates conflict, disappointment, and frustration. And then if you're in a frustrating relationship and someone else crosses your path who you think is going to meet your emotional needs, you're going to be drawn to them. So that's actually the origin of all infidelity, is you're drawn to the person who you think will meet your emotional needs. I mean, that's why you got married in the first place. But of course, that's a trap as well. And so
Okay.
the problem is that our hearts aren't healed.
So let me jump in. And Kathy, let me ask you this question. So if you were speaking to whether a man or woman, but in particular a woman, and her needs aren't being met, and in her mind, she's wandering down a dark road, trying to find those needs met through someone else, how would you counsel her to come back, especially when she's so unhappy with where she's at? What would you say?
Good question. I would begin asking her to look at her heart as to where she is hurting inside, and talking to a counselor about what is driving her. So many of us are looking to our husbands to be the one who will tell us that we're everything that we need to be, that our husband is the one who breathes life into us. And we actually need to be looking to Jesus for who's breathing life into us. But you start with getting your needs for acceptance and security and love met by the Lord. And then out of the overflow, because you're being healed on the inside, then you can love your husband appropriately. But he needs to also learn how to love you out of a selfless place, and you have to love him out of a selfless place. And so many marriages are struggling because they're being selfish. It's all about me, my needs, as opposed to what can I do to meet his needs or her needs.
So it really boils down to a healing of the heart. As long as your hearts aren't healed, there's potential for conflict.
I think we could probably spend about an hour just talking about that whole subject. Let me move on to something that's even more painful. You've run into this. I've run into it for years as a pastor and dealing with families where there has been marital infidelity. The covenant has been broken. Is there hope? How do you begin to survive if you can? What are your thoughts?
Well, of course, there is hope. I mean, there are many couples who have recovered from infidelity. Of course, there's hope. And if both partners are willing to turn to Jesus for help, then of course there's hope. So what would be the first step? Well, disclosure. The
Yeah.
first step is disclosure. You know, what really happened? How long has this been going on for? And the extent of it. But then I guess it's forgiveness.
Well,
No,
get
I guess
into a
not.
counselor. Get to someone who is going to walk you through that difficult pathway of not only confession and disclosure, but the pathway of how do I navigate this betrayal, this loss of trust? How do I live with someone who obviously did not honor me the way I needed to be honored? And a rebuilding of trust is a really long-standing thing. You can forgive, but reconciliation doesn't necessarily follow forgiveness. That's a long road.
Yeah, rebuilding trust is a long pathway. Forgiveness is an act of the will, but rebuilding trust requires two people who are willing to do it.
So when you talk about forgiveness and experiencing the forgiveness of Christ, let's take the last minute in this part of the interview. Talk to me about how that works so that we work towards that place of rebuilding trust, because it is a journey. How does forgiveness and understanding what Christ has done for us play a key role?
Well, when you understand that Christ has forgiven us of anything that we have asked him, like if we've repented and come to him and say, God, I've really messed up, I need your forgiveness. You can receive it intellectually, but you really also need to receive it in your heart so that you forgive yourself for what you have done. But then there's also the step of that forgiveness, receiving from him, means we also need to change how we behave. And so allowing the fruit of the Spirit to begin to develop in our lives, love, joy, peace, patience, long suffering, and so on. All of those things need to start to develop. And so it's a pathway that there will be repeated tests that have to be passed in order for trust to be rebuilt. And if you fail a test, then you step back and you have to rebuild that again and again and again. And so it is a process. It is a long process.
Kathy, that's so helpful to hear that. And I know it comes as a word of encouragement to people listening today to say, I'm going to step into this process and press on and let my marriage become what God intended it to be. We're going to be right back with some more questions. You're listening to The Perspective. I'm Mike Sherbino. We got Dr. Grant and Kathy Mullen with us today.
You are so much more than what you do, what you achieve, what you feel like. We want you to know there is so much more about you, and you are not defined by a goal, a win, or the position you hold. We want you to know you are more complex, more unique, and more significant than any gold, silver, or bronze. You are the total athlete.
You know, stats constantly reveal that Christians, unfortunately, are not very far behind the rest of society when it comes to infidelity. And I just wanted to ask the question, why do you think that's so?
And that's because you can intellectually accept Jesus into your life and become a Christian, but that doesn't mean your heart has been healed or your heart has changed. So what's happening in the Christian community, people come into the kingdom, they make a profession of faith, but they haven't done the inner work. So in other words, they bring all their emotional baggage into their faith, into their marriage. And if they've never dealt with the healing of the heart, then heart issues are going to cause conflict in marriage. And so then you're going to have the very same statistics as the world, because people haven't actually changed their heart, even though they believe differently.
And also to top or throw into that mix is we are still very involved in the world through media exposure, you know, the TV, movies, internet, all of these things expose you to the options and the other side of things. And so you think, oh, well, you know, I can always do this if that doesn't work. And they aren't keeping their focus on Jesus and the call to become in covenant relationship with their spouse. They're saying, well, everything in the world is saying I can have something different.
But also, too, if in the Christian communities, no one's talking about personal transformation and healing of the heart, then all you have is a profession of faith and the relationships fall apart.
That's so true. These are such good points. And I think it's really important that you stress the fact that there's an intellectual commitment or understanding of a relationship with Jesus, but it's not a heart change. And I see this constantly, and it's really scary because it's one thing to have a head knowledge, but when it doesn't become something that totally transform every single part of your being, it's so hard to live it out in the way God wants us to, intends us to, and then to have that type of marriage relationship. You're right on the money with that. Talking about the infidelity again and the types of infidelity, it's interesting to also see that they talk about there's 3 types of affairs, and we've mentioned the emotional, but there's also the one night stands and the attachment affairs and sexual addiction affairs. Is there really any major difference, or does it really matter what kind of affair it is as far as how to attempt restoration?
Yeah, actually there is, because if it's a single impulsive event, that you can heal from that much faster than if it's a lifetime of serial infidelity and it becomes just part of their character. So yeah, there is actually a difference. Like, for example, in mental health, I know that people who have bipolar disorder, if they have a severe elevated mood swing or they come off their medicine, they could have one very impulsive day and do all kinds of things that they later regret. And you can recover from that by getting back on the treatment. And so that would be, to me, an isolated incident that wouldn't be repeated because, with treatment. But so, yeah, there really is a difference, because some people that if it's gone on for a long time, that's much more difficult to recover from.
And if you are used to getting your emotional needs met through pornography, through visiting massage parlors where there's extra activities happening more than massage and this kind of thing, or even affairs at work and so on, the emotional attachment in those places is way stronger, and the spiritual contamination is far more profound.
So there is a difference.
Yeah.
I never really thought about that, but that's very interesting. I never really thought about the fact of the impact sometimes of physical problems that could cause this. It's very important to add this into us. Thank you so much for sharing that. On another note, I want to talk about the power of forgiveness. You touched on it, and I think it's so important. Talk to me about the amazing power of forgiveness.
Well, forgiveness is so key to our existence here. You know, you can some people say, well, I need to be forgiving my husband all the time for how he doesn't pick his socks up, or he doesn't do this, or he, the toilet paper roll is never replaced.
Yeah, none of this refers to your current husband.
No, this is not not a current situation. But you hear people saying, well, my wife is lazy and I have to keep forgiving her for that or whatever. No, that is not a forgiveness issue so much as developing fruit of the Spirit in terms of a relationship and how you handle simple things. You don't want to make mountains out of molehills in general life. You develop fruit of the Spirit, so you have patience for the husband who's not doing what you would like him to do. But that husband also needs to develop kindness, so he knows his wife would prefer this. And so it becomes a workable situation. But forgiveness is for those times when this is a really big issue. You've hurt me, and I really need to recognize the level of hurt, what it's done to me emotionally, and then still choose to forgive and allow the love of Jesus to flow through me and heal the hurts in my heart and the wounds in my soul. Now, you may still need to talk to a counselor to help you actually get through the emotional side of things.
It can be hard to forgive.
Yeah, it can be really
absolutely.
hard. And particularly where there's been betrayal, it will be even harder because then you have to rebuild that whole trust thing. Yeah. And if there's been a history of broken trust, then the trust becomes really much more difficult to regain because you've got a long history to overcome.
But also, too, the offender needs to be able to forgive themselves because they can be just so overwhelmed with guilt and shame that they can't forgive themselves. And they have to realize that Jesus' forgiveness is for them too. So yes, the spouse has to forgive, but the offender needs to realize that he can be forgiven and restored as well.
But the other thing that you need to throw in there is the apology. Because the person doesn't come in and just say, oh, I'm sorry, and then move on. They need to come in and say, I'm sorry. I recognize that my actions have done this, and this to you, and I really regret having made you feel that way. So, in other words, more
meaningful.
The person making the apology needs to place themselves in the hurt person's place and figure out, that's what I've done, that's what I need to be apologizing for, and it will become way easier for the spouse who was hurt to be able to reach that place of forgiveness.
So really, you have two people in a marriage, and it's two people who need absolute healing if they're going to have that restoration. Thanks for sharing that. I want to bring back Mike and Mitch.
Well, as I'm just listening to what has been being dialogued here, Mitch, you're not married yet. Man, you should be just writing notes like crazy because it's not enough just to say, I'm sorry. Did you pick up on that?
Mike, I'm soaking it all in. Every word out of these people's mouths, I'm drinking it up.
Yeah, exactly. And Grant and Kathy, what you've done is in laying out for us some of these principles, I believe it's giving hope. I want to encourage people to get a copy of your book, Emotionally Free, which helps people to unpack some of the inner things that they've been going through so that they can walk in the freedom that God has created them to walk in. And I just want to say this, there is hope for your situation.
A life-altering disability, infidelity, and trapped in a prison of fear. Those were only a few of my giants. What are yours? People see a happy marriage, a crown, a title as Miss Wheelchair Canada, but not understand the giants I've battled. I know what it is to be consumed with fear and struggling to find hope. How easy do you think it was for me to walk through infidelity with my husband? Once I started fighting with God's strength, the battles that nearly destroyed me actually gave me this contagious courage that has unlocked a new level of joy and freedom I didn't know existed. Did you know that every giant you face is an opportunity for an even bigger victory? What giants are you facing right now?
Have you ever thought, what is the big contributor to an unhappy marriage? Well, if we could have a little drum roll, likely what would come up would be poor listening skills. Matter of fact, we can talk about listening, we can pretend that we listen, but if there's not been a change in our behavior, we are either saying to the person that we profess to love, I am not interested in changing, it doesn't matter what you're saying, or I'm just totally oblivious. How are you for listening? One of the most successful men in the Bible was a guy named Nehemiah. And because he learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart, God was able to use him to lead the nation of Israel into a whole period of rebuilding. When we listen to what Grant and Kathy were talking about today, we realize that many times a relationship needs to be rebuilt. When Christ is at the basis of your relationship, the foundation stone, I want you to know that there is hope. You can walk into that forgiveness that Kathy was talking about. It's not cheap forgiveness. It's forgiveness actually that causes for a change of action. It's forgiveness that will lead us to be people who want to intentionally build trust, to change those behaviors that cause our spouse to doubt whether or not we're even saying the truth. But I want to think about listening, and I want to take a different approach. I want to think about it in the context of, if I'm not listening properly to my wife, if you're not listening properly to your spouse, you're going to drive her away. And are you aware of some of the ways that as men, that we oftentimes drive our spouse away? I think sometimes it's through being simply insensitive. Oh, it can go for both sides, but let me pick on the guys for a moment. Sometimes just being indifferent, not attending to some of the little details in her life to help her with whatever it is around the home or going out the door as you're both going to work or in raising the children. It's just easy to be insensitive and you just kind of do your own thing. Another thing that is really hard for you to, if you want to develop listening skills, is sarcasm. When sarcasm is in your relationship, it just kind of takes the life out of it. I know some people and they say, well, that's kind of my love language. You know, we'll say words like, oh, you're such a goof, or you know, you're always this, and we make comments about weight, size, things that we do or not do, and those words can rip us apart. If someone says sticks and stones can break a bone and names can hurt a heart, well, then we understand the power of those words, because sticks and stones, they might not hurt the same way that words do. They just rip us apart. I think the other thing we do is we drive people away when we pretend that we know it all. And could it be today that as you're listening, you are a know-it-all? When you're a know-it-all, it means that your spouse, they don't know it at all. And so what is that all about? What set Nehemiah apart in the Old Testament is that he listened to the needs when his brother Hananiah came. And he said, what's going on back in Jerusalem? And he said, it's terrible. Could your spouse have ever said, hey, things aren't good. This isn't the way that we want it to be. And you just say, oh, you know what, I'll deal with it later. I got to watch the football game. And when that happens, things just die inside. Don't be a know-it-all. And there are some things, if you're going to learn to listen to each other, that you need to clear up. Maybe you should have done this way before you ever tied the knot, or maybe you haven't tied the knot yet. You need to talk about past relationships. What baggage are you bringing into the relationship? Because what happens if you don't deal with it, there's a place in your mind, and guys are so compartmentalized in the way that they think, we're just going to want to shut that whole area down. I'm not going to deal with it. That's in the past. Don't bring it up ever again. But you need to deal with past relationships. Finances can be such a lightning rod in a relationship. And especially for a man who wants to think that he's kind of got it all together. He's the all-wonderful provider. And if finances are causing stress, you need to talk about it. You need to talk about it as a couple. You were made to complete each other, not to compete against each other. And then you need to talk about sex. Final episode this week, I'm going to be talking about how we move towards sexual intimacy. But sex is an important part for you to be dialoguing about and to be listening to what it is that your partner is saying and what it is that they need. You know, as we ponder listening, good listeners listen not just with their ears, but with their eyes. Put down your phone, turn off the TV, and look each other in the eye. And when somebody says something to you that's really important, it might be wise to say, so what you're saying is this: you're struggling with this area, you still love me, but you're frustrated with how I'm responding. When I talk that way to my wife, then she knows that I'm actually listening. And I need to be listening for the heart of the matter. But more than anything else, what am I going to do with what my wife has said to me? I want to be a great listener. I believe you do as well. It's the key to a healthy relationship.
Well, Mike, I was paying close attention. I was listening to everything you said, and I appreciate what you were talking on. Now, I've got one question for you, if you don't mind. I'm listening to that, and I'm a guy, and you did say explicitly, guys like to think that we know it all. You're saying avoid that in relationships. But I'm saying, okay, well, what happens if I've got a girlfriend or if I've got a wife or whatever, and it feels like things are going wrong? I'm saying, as a guy, I want to know it all. I want to have it together, and I want to provide for, my lady in that way. So what advice do you have?
Well, Mitch, I think the first thing is to realize is that you have good intentions, but you need to watch how you flesh that out, because we all like to solve problems as a guy. And maybe what you need to do, first of all, is to say something like this: help me to understand what you're feeling or what you're thinking. What do you think, Julie? Am I right?
You're right. You're right. And, on that note, it's interesting. I've heard before that when you have a problem, whether it be communication or something else, don't look at it as this is a problem with you and not a problem with me, and you're on opposite sides. Remember, you're actually beside each other. You're on the same team, and together you're looking at the problem outwards and dealing with it as a couple. If you do that, you're going to be able to not point fingers at each other, and you're going to be able to work through it.
Right. And Julie, can I ask you a question? I'm looking for a woman's perspective here. Mike talked about sensitivity. He said, you know what, you actually should be, as a guy, sensitive. But I thought, guys got to be tough. They're not sensitive. So, Julie, what do I do with that? What are ladies looking for from a guy?
Honesty, not macho, strong, tough, and not weaklings. Being able to make that dance of your personality. You want to take lead, you show you're trying, you're humble if you fall. So that shows both sides. It isn't an easy road. It is a balance of the two.
Wow. Okay. So we got a whole subject right there, Mitch. You and I will talk about it afterwards. But before we wrap up today, here on The Perspective, we want to make available to you a free gift. Just go to that barcode or write to us at theperspective.tv and get the worksheets for this week. For Monday, it's communication. For today, it's on how to be a better listener. We're going to have one tomorrow on conflict, right through the week towards sexual intimacy. You want to get a copy of those things. We're glad you've watched today. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow. It's going to be a great week.